So let's move forward with today's clinical topic. Our speaker today is Dr. Eric Johnson. He's a general dentist from right down the road in San Clemente. He's a graduate of USC and he served in the Air Force. He does quite a bit of headache prevention in his practice, and I've been to some lectures that he's done on headache prevention, really great information. But today he's going to share the Successful Dentist Guide to Avoiding Burnout. And this is certainly an occupational risk for all of us. And I'm really happy to turn this over to you, Dr. Johnson.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Johnson. I am so pleased to be here this morning and share 40 minutes with you about a topic that affects about 80% of the workers globally. We have an epidemic with burnout. What we're finding is that burnout affects workers. And what we're finding is that we have an audience with us today. 76% of us are in solo practice. And so I come to you this morning as a clinician, I come to you as a researcher, and as a coach. So I'm really excited. I want to thank our friends at Glidewell for sharing with us, Dr. Park and Nicole for making this reality. I want to do a shout out to all the dentists that are logging in. I want you to know I get you. A shout out to you because I know how hard you work. I know exactly what the stresses are that you go through. You guys are talented. You guys are achieving. You guys are motivated. And it's also Friday. And I know that some of you are coming to this webinar a little bit depleted, a little bit empty. And so I think this webinar is going to hit home. The word in Japanese called koshi. It's called death from overworking. So it's a global epidemic. We spend 90,000 hours in our lifetime. That's half our working life working. And some cultures are 996, where they come in and they implement 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And so I get the burnout. I have 2,500 active patients. I have 10 employees. I know firsthand the effects of chronic work, chronic stress. I also know the implications of fatigue and what the impact it has on my life and also on my family. And so for years, I didn't share this issue with burnout. I didn't share with anybody. I thought it was only me. I looked around at all the other dentists and thought, well, they don't seem to be having an issue with it. So I kept it to myself. There was stigma. And then I was teaching with California Center of Advanced Dentistry. I was the director for 2 years. And during that time, I started sharing and asking other dentists, how are you guys doing? How are you doing with your practice? How are you doing with stress? How are you doing with burnout? And we had these side conversations, and these stories began to become similar. And they started asking, like, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel completely spent? And these lived experiences, these similar stories begin to surface. And what I realized that there's a stigma among dentists that we can't really talk about this burnout, and that we're not doing a really good job dealing with talking about it and having upstream interventions. Matter of fact, since the pandemic, some research shows that burnout has increased threefold. I read one study recently that burnout for dentists is a 67% prevalence among us. And I don't think we're doing a very good job dealing with it. So I set out to do something. I wanted to research. So I paired up with the University of Laverne, and I'm doing some research with dentists. And I'm doing a phenomenological study with dentists about occupational burnout. And I'm studying the connection between efficacy, resiliency, and the success of a practice. So I come to you as a researcher, I come to you as a clinician, and I'm also come to you as a coach. And I've started an organization, Leaders in Dentistry, that allows dentists to have a place where they can come in and we can talk about it, we can support each other and find community. The biggest thing I hear over and over in the hundreds of conversations I've had with dentists is I wish I had somebody to talk to. And so at 51 years old, what I want to do is open up this community and offer research and share my connections. So what we're going to do in this webinar today, we're going to talk about what is burnout? Why does it occur? What are the 6 root causes for burnout? And I want to give you some action steps for Monday. And so you're going to walk away hopefully with one or two pearls that you can implement on Monday. And it's going to be different for everybody. Not one thing is for everybody, meaning that you're going to take out different things from the 6 root causes, but I want you to take out one thing. And the research is about 50 years old, so it is not new. Something that's I want to show you how it's written in science. We're going to talk about some terms. Okay, so terms are really important because they allow us to share the lived experience and embody it in some terminology that makes sense. For example, you come home from the practice and you struggle with, I don't want to see another patient. I've had patients all day. I had a crying patient. I have an anxiety patient. My staff, it seems like all I give and I give, I just don't want to do it. The term is called compassion fatigue. We'll talk about that. Or you have, you set out to do dentistry and you just don't have enough time to do the procedure the way that you want to do, and it gnaws on you. And you feel like, man, I just wish I had more time. And it begins to accumulate. That's moral injury. We'll talk about that. And then as things get tougher in the practice, we funnel down and we hunker down and it becomes more narrow, and we press the pedal harder and we exclude those things, give us support and sustain us. And we call that exhaustion funnel. We'll talk about that. Job crafting, we empower our team to develop for ownership. We'll talk about that. And transformational leadership is one of my favorite. In my doctorate in leadership, we talk about how leadership is the secret sauce in private practice and in community health. And transformational leadership is you take the base knowledge, you add one new piece of information, and you do an action, and you actually make a change about it. So I'm excited about these terms. You're going to see these terms in research. Nicole, we talked about doing a poll. Hopefully we can do the poll right now. I want you to look at, hey docs, look at this list. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Number one, let's do a poll. Number one is you are that dentist who your hands are up and you love dentistry. Yeah, it's tiring at times, but you love dentistry, you love your patients, you love what you do, and you can't wait to go to work on Monday. So on this poll, give yourself a 1. Number 2, if you notice, he's a little slunched down a little bit more, where you love your job, you love your craft, but man, you're really overextended. Like you hit it's like a time vortex when you get to the office, and it sucks the time, and you come home and you're exhausted. All you want to do is sit in the corner. I have 4 little boys, and it's like all I want them to go to bed so I can go to bed. And you're pretty tired almost every day. Number 3, not only you're overextended, but number 3, now you're becoming a little cynical, where you're kind of doubting maybe your patients, you're doubting maybe your employees, you're doubting whether or not this was the right profession for you. And I like his back because that's often how my back feels at the end of the day. Or 4, where not only are you doubting your profession, but this is the one where you begin to doubt yourself. You begin to doubt your efficacy. You begin to doubt whether or not you're a really good dentist, and maybe you're considering it's a moral issue, and you have the imposter syndrome. If somebody really knew how bad I was, maybe you give yourself a 4. Number 5, there's 0 on that battery, where you get up tired. When you get to the office, there's no energy. You have 2 lead feet. There's nothing left to give. And I want you to do a poll now, and let's see, and Nicole, let's see what results we get in a little bit. But I want to see where we're at. We have very, very smart people online today, very motivated, high achievers, but yet the reality of running a practice and the stress of the practice is real.
Dr. Johnson, is there our images? We're seeing some boxes over the presentation. I'm wondering if the one on that one, is it our faces, the speakers? If we can move it. There we go. That's better.
Is that better?
Oh, actually, go. You made it better, and now it's showing big again.
How's that?
It's still showing. Is it any way to move it off the screen, or? That's better.
How's that?
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Okay. Are we back online?
Yes. And then
Good. Okay, so go
we're just
ahead.
waiting for the poll to finish.
Okay, so while you guys are polling, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my family. There are my 4 boys. We're at Lake Shasta. There's my wife of 22 years. And, I look at my life and I live near the beach. I have a wonderful practice. I love what I do. But there are times, and I wonder if you can relate to this, there are times where the stress gets to me and I have a little bit of change in perspective. Things get a little bit blurry, and the things that are good, I can't sometimes see. I don't know if you relate to that, where you look at all the things that aren't right, and we get frustrated, and I become agitated. And then as that chronic stress increases, the beautiful things in my life become even more blurry and out of focus. And I've talked to my friends, I've talked to counselors, I've talked to support, and they're like, don't you understand what you've got? You've got a wonderful career, you got a wonderful family. Why don't you take a vacation? And what happens is that becomes even more stressful. How are we doing on a poll, Nicole?
We are still getting answers.
Okay,
Oh,
cool.
there it is. Can you see the answers?
I do. Okay, so we have 19% give ourselves a number one. We love our profession. 39% feel pretty tired, but still are engaged. A third of us, that's very accurate to what I my research, is that where cynicism, where we begin to doubt our profession, we become a little jaded. And actually 11% on number 4, where we are doubting ourselves and the imposter syndrome. That's very accurate to my research. Thank you for doing that, Nicole.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right.
So during my opportunities to teach, what I would do is I would talk to these dentists, and hundreds of conversations, I would ask them how they're doing with their practices. And quotes like, I feel jaded. Stress gnaws on me every day. I feel trapped. I wish I had someone to talk to. I feel alone. I met with a dentist 2 weeks ago, and I said, how are you doing with your practice? He looks at me and he looks away and he's like, I feel like I'm decaying on the inside. I met with a dentist a couple months ago, and he told me he's writing a book. And in that book, I said, cool, what's the book about? And he's like, I'm writing a book about how much I hate patients. And these themes are becoming common, and they surface in this lived experience. And what I'm hearing is dentists feel trapped. I spent all this time and all this money. What am I going to do? How can I get out of this? I feel isolated. I feel alone. And the question is, is there something wrong with me? The stigma is I can't share this with people, because if I share this, who's going to follow me? Are my employees going to follow me? Are my patients going to trust me? If I share that I'm chronically tired, will I have an issue with my DEA Class 2 license? Is there going to be an issue with the reputation? So we hold this inside. I had one dentist that said, I feel like my environment is changing me. I feel like, I'm a cucumber that's turning into a sour pickle. My practice is changing me, and it's not for the best. The first thing I want all the docs out there to know that this is not a weakness. It's not a flaw. It's not a moral failure or efficiency, but it's a natural response to the stressors that we feel. In 2019, the World Health Organization finally came up with a definition. Burnout is a syndrome. It's not a disease, but it's a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress, not acute, that has been mismanaged or not successfully managed. Now, a couple of things from the slide is that it's a syndrome. It's not a disease. It's not an axis one where there's depression and chronic anxiety, but it's a syndrome, a response to stress versus acute stress, which means that we have a hard day, we recover. These are the chronic stressors that don't get removed and they're not being managed. And so what it is that burnout, we're trying to function well in a challenging environment, but it's not going real well. There's a mismatch. That's a word that keeps coming up in the literature, that it's a mismatch. And it comes from the sciences, from the burning out of ball bearings and the burning out of light bulbs and the burning out of rocket boosters. And so what happens is that we have our reservoirs are empty. Another analogy that Christine Maslach, which is the leader in research of burnout, she says it's often like a shoe. There's like a pebble in the shoe that you walk around every day, and it's not a boulder, but it's something that irritates the heel, and it just doesn't go away. It's a constant friction that's constantly there. As the dentist, I think it's often like our occlusion, where we have a tooth that is out of fit. And as a result, it has fractions, it has recession, it has periodontal pocket. It's also like a crown. We would never deliver a crown on a patient and it be too high, and we just say, hey, just deal with it. Just deal with that high. And that's not what we're going to do as dentists. Talk about the pathogenesis of burnout. The front line, we are frontline workers that are constantly in a mode of giving and compassion. And so there is a time where we actually run out of fuel, and that's called compassion fatigue. The medical field is the frontline worker that's at risk. The research shows that 400 female physicians a year will take their life. That's compassion fatigue. And there's different personality types for dentists that drive this. We're type A, we're high achievers. We like competition. The Myers-Briggs says that dentists are ISTJ, which means that we are high craving for achievement. We also have a sense of perfection that we have an expectation of how our dentistry should be, and then sometimes life happens and it doesn't achieve that. When I was in dental school, this sense of perfection was drilled into me. I don't know about you guys, but I remember one time I did a wax up for an instructor, and I worked probably 30 hours on this wax up, and the instructor crumbled the wax up and said, "You offend me," and walked away. And the sense of perfection, this perfection is still within me, and I still think about that. And that's also about the public perception, that how often in our practice do patients say, "Man, Dr. Johnson, I really, really like you, but I really hate this place. I really wish that we could hang out, but not here." So this public perception of dentistry being a difficult place can wear on us. I remember when I was a captain in the United States Air Force, and I sat down, and Lieutenant Colonel, she had 25 years of experience, and she said during the interview, she said, "This is not getting any easier." And so the public perception is, I hate my dentist. And I had one patient said that the nickname that we have for dentists at our house is, we call you Satan. I was like, okay, that's not going to work. So we run two businesses. We own a entrepreneur business, and we also own a clinical practice. And as a result, we have to learn how to manage both. The stressors, there's a research that shows that 60% of dentists are struggling with moderate stress, 12% are struggling with severe stress. 20% of dentists report that they should reduce alcohol consumption, and 27% are reporting moderate depression. And what happens is that we all boil at different times, different temperatures. Some of us deal with acute stress differently. Gordon Christensen said that our dental license is really over only a driver's permit. We're learning these things as we go after graduation. So we can't expect to walk through water and not get wet. We can't expect to give and be compassionate to our patients and run two businesses, the clinical and also running the business side, without it impacting acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress, we have issues with HR, financial overhead, we have insurance dependency, we have litigation, debt servicing, we have missed appointments. And then as a result, that turns into chronic stress of anxiety, high level concentration issues, time restraints. These are all external, internal stressors. And as a result, it starts to play on us. There's a physical. We have issues with immunodeficiency, chest pain, endocrine imbalance, low sex drive, metabolic diversity, and also increased lipids. We also need to be aware of cognitive disorders such as forgetfulness and indecisive, lack of focus, negative thinking, pessimism, and catastrophe thinking. And then behavioral, we become agitated, we withdrawn, and substance abuse and sleep disorders. 68% of dentists struggle with sleep issues, 43% struggle every a few days, and 5% struggle every day with sleep disorder. And that's going to affect our practice. So as we go from low stress to high acute, it begins to build on us, the accumulation. And the exhaustion funnel is where you realize your practice isn't thriving. And so you must hunker down, and we work harder, and we narrow the focus down. And what happens is we end up excluding the things that will bring us health. And so we feel like we got to walk the halls at midnight, but really what we needed to be doing is focusing on the bigger picture and those things that bring us sustain and bring us energy. So if you listen to your body when it whispers, you won't have to hear it scream. The effects of managed chronic stress will actually accumulate. So let's talk about the research. Burnout follows a predictable pattern. Chronic exhaustion is not burnout. If you are struggling with chronic exhaustion, you are just overextended. But if chronic exhaustion, like in our poll, turns into cynicism, where you begin to doubt yourself and doubt those around you, then you become, this is the progression to where you have decreased personal achievement. Decreased personal achievement is where you begin to realize your patients aren't returning, your team is turnover, there's conflict in your team, and then what we end up, there's a cycle. So we go from exhaustion to cynicism to decreased personal achievement. And what I want to talk about for the rest of our webinar today are the 6 root causes that deal with the decreased personal achievement. Traditionally, what we've done with burnout, we've had workers on one hand say, all right, Dr. Johnson, what you need to do is take a vacation. You need to do some yoga. You need a workout. The responsibility is on you. But the research is showing that it's not just the worker, but it's also the workplace. There's a picture of a canary there. So they used to use these canaries in mines, and the canaries would go in the canals, and they could smell, and if there was toxic, the canaries would have hard breathing. So it'd be like a toxic cave, sending a tunnel and having the bird go down, and the bird gets sick. And we say to the bird, hey, bird, I want you to work out a little bit more. It's really, you need to do some more yoga and put the responsibility on the worker. But the reality, it's the relationship between the worker and the workplace. And the workplace needs to be addressed. And I want to talk about 6 root causes that are actually, there might be more, but the 6 root causes, these are the 6 root causes that have been demonstrated in research. The first one is, well, let me go over workload control. Those go together. Those are how we do our job effectively. Reward and community. These are how we deal with each other effectively. And fairness and values are how we are moral. These are a little bit more difficult. We'll talk about those. Okay, so workload. The mismatches in workload. Most of us think we use workload as I'm burned out because of all the hard work that I have to do. But the reality is that the workload can be quantitative, which could be how much work you have to do, too much work with a limited amount of time. You don't have enough resources. You don't have enough employees. You don't have the right equipment, you don't have enough training. So there's an overwork mismatch. It could be quantitative, but it also could be qualitative, where you're doing your work and the type of work is emotionally and physically draining. And that's more me, where after I do a crown prep, I'm exhausted. and I need a little bit of time. Some of you docs out there, you jive and you can work workload. The qualitative work does not get you, but maybe being with patients, I'd rather just hang out with my patients all day. And there's a concept of underwork where what we do is mundane. And the mismatch is that what you do is repetitive. It's not stimulating. It's not challenging. You do the same thing every day and you feel depleted at the end of the day because there's nothing about it triggers you and makes you excited. Studies show that if you have a workload mismatch, you're 2.2 times to suffer from burnout. I've seen it with my employees, star employees that come in, they're energized and they're excited and they're engaged, and they're burnout, they become cynical and they become withdrawn. So workload mismatch often does with insufficient time and insufficient challenges to do good work in the workplace. There's a researcher from Stanford University, Dr. Jeff Pfeiffer, that wrote a book I'd recommend, Dying for a Paycheck. And he argues that burnout has to do with how we're doing our jobs, how we're running our practice. It's caused by system issues, policy issues, and procedures. It's how we're getting work done that's causing the mismatch that creates chronic stress. The second one that goes with workload overload or underload has to do with control, has to do with managing autonomy. So there is time for control, a time where we have a new employee and we need to micromanage them. But that's for a short period of time. So another mismatch that we may experience in our practice is that there's a lack of autonomy, where we as a provider or our employees don't have a voice in their practice. They don't feel like their opinions matter. They feel like that they have low morale. Nobody's really asking them about their opinion. They're underperforming. There's high turnover, and they are not having a way to input into the practice. There's no buy-in. It's JOB. They're not thinking for themselves. If you are a dentist that micromanages, that's going to deplete your battery. Your rocket ship going to get empty. Your ball bearings are going to grow, wear, and overheat. So if everybody's coming to you and you are the yes person, they ask you for everything, turn that over back to the employees and don't be the yes person, but allow them to do some job crafting. Allow them, your employees, they are our greatest assets. Allow them to tweak the mundane. Allow them to take their job position and become that powerful engine, and give your employees permission to develop their job in such a way that they feel engaged, they feel motivated, and that they can take great care of patients and be engaged. And sometimes it's just tweaking the mundane. You can't grow if you don't let go. And so we have to let go of micromanaging. And sometimes we realize we as dentists, we feel control. We feel controlled by the schedule. We feel controlled by the employees. And what I want us to realize is that we don't have to be controlled by that. But actually, we did not buy a job, but actually we have the potential and the opportunities to tweak this and become more engaged and allow our team to be more engaged. The next one, it has to do with rewards. They did a study on a Fortune 500 business where it had a lot of burnout, a lot of turnover. And the researchers went in and they asked the executive team of this organization, and they said, what do you think is the main cause for burnout? Why are your employees leaving in droves? And the executive team said, well, the employees complain about too much work and they complain about not getting paid enough. After the research, what they found is that it wasn't about the pay per se or the workload. What they felt like is that they were not being appreciated. It's a big one in our practices, is that we work with people and patients and employees where they are not feeling appreciated. So two types of rewards, external and internal. Extrinsic rewards is pay. It's bonuses, commissions, benefits, salary compensations. We have to pay our employees a fair wage. One thing I do is I check with other practices that are out there, and we do a salary comparison. And so I know I pay a fair wage. That way they're not resentful. And that way they know what's out there. But the intrinsic rewards is the culture of appreciation that doesn't cost money. And the research is showing that employees want to know that they're appreciated. Give them positive feedback. Highlight the stories of how the employees go beyond the expected, how they took really good care of the patients. Highlight these among the team. Create a working environment where there is support, and they go out of the way and they know they're going to be recognized for it. There's two ways to do it. There's a vertical appreciation where I can tell my employees, I'm really proud of the way that you managed that child. I'm so proud of how you handled that case. I'm so proud of how you handled that insurance or the front office issue. But the horizontal, teaching our employees to give horizontal intrinsic rewards by having them have each other's back, having them complement and support one another, and fostering that culture, that's going to pay dividends, that horizontal intrinsic rewards. If employees feel appreciated, the patients will feel it. They will come into this place and say, there's something about this place that feels really good. And they are going to come back and they're going to do treatment. They're going to pay for treatment. They're going to refer their friends because there's a sense of respect and there's a sense of positive feedback. Be slow to criticize and fast to appreciate. One of my favorite quotes. The next thing has to do with rewards is workplace community. I know you probably never have any issues with employees, right? Well, strong organizations that have employees with purpose, belonging, trust, connection, they find themselves part of something bigger than themselves. If the group feels like they're part of something special, that builds community. And that community translates to success of a practice. If you foster incivility, which means that when things get tough, are you going to be there for me? Are you going to have my back? Because things we know don't always go expected. And there are such things as workplace bullies, where we have employees that roll their eyes. They're quick to put down. They're quick to little gestures that are diminutive. And sometimes it could be between the doctors themselves. It could be between the front and back office. It could be between the hygienists and the assistants. I think you understand. And what happens is that this incivility creates lack of trust. It creates isolation. It creates loneliness and insecurity and a lack of attachment. And that's a mismatch. That's a root cause for burnout, not only for the providers, but also for the employees, and it translates down to the patients, and patients can feel that incivility. We spend 90,000 hours of our wake life doing dentistry. We need to enjoy to work with those we enjoy and have each other's backs. Teamwork divides the task and it multiplies the success. Our biggest asset to avoid burnout is team. And our biggest access to building our practice and developing a momentum has to do with the trust and respect that we have with our team, with one another, because these get tough in dentistry. The last two are moral mismatches. There's fairness and values. Moral fairness is when things in your practice are unfair. They are there are employees that get away with things that are not consistent. People who are treated fairly and consistently, it builds trust. If there is respect, there's this concept of reciprocity. Employees will treat those who are around them the same way that they're being treated. So if we're treating with fairness and justness, there's fair compensation, there's acknowledgement, we're not showing favoritism, then the employees will show that to one another. And eventually, employees will show that to our patients. Our employees will be fair and respectful, and they will treat each other in likewise. There's a pedodontist that was sharing that she was struggling with fairness in her practice. She was in a group practice, and they put her in a room doing all the clinical on the kids when there was another pedodontist, another room doing only exams and x-rays. And she was making more money than the treatment. And she felt like how unfair that was. Studies show that workers complain more about unfairness than they complain about workload and salary. Treat others with respect, the whole concept of reciprocity. How you treat others will be how they treat you. That if you're not being treated with fairness and respect, if there's inconsistencies and leniencies, then in reciprocity, in likeness, we will treat one another, and it creates insecurity. And the last one of the research-supported mismatches that cause burnout is a mismatch of values. Simply put, what we say is different than what we do. One of my mentors, Michael Abernathy, talked about, I said, from your experience, what are some of the things that cause burnout? And he says, without hesitating, he said, dentists need to do what they say, meaning that you may have a plaque that says patients are first, but really, honestly, what we do doesn't support that. There's mismatches between our actions. There's a discongruent. There's a gap between what's said and what is done. If you feel like if we say patients are first, but we don't give ourselves enough time to do the treatment well, there's a mismatch of values, and that moral injury or vicarious trauma begins to build. It's like the pipe that gets corrosion. And so we say patients are first, or we say employees are first, but our actions don't support our words, and there's a gap between those two. So don't trust words, trust actions. So 6 root causes of burnout. Workload. My recommendation is train. Get the right people on the bus and get the right people in the right seat on that bus. Look at your scheduling, look at the amount of time that you have for treatment, and document that and make appropriate changes. I like to create a buffer between my treatment. I just need a few minutes. Some of you guys are so amazing in your clinical that you can work and it re-energizes you. I actually need to take a little 5-minute to kind of relish on my accomplishment, that I was hunched over in the backside of a molar and dark and wet and bloody, and I was able to prep that, and I achieved that, and the patient walked out of there satisfied, and I'm going to celebrate that. And for workload mismatches, have your morning huddles, have your end of the day huddles, have mini huddles during the day. Get your office manual up to date so everything is print, so people know what's expected of them. And I've also changed my workload. I go in later now. I go in an hour and a half later than I used to. I actually find 2 days a week leave earlier. And I find my numbers even stronger because I'm not overextended and I'm able to be more efficient. And my team, job craft, they're able to do more. And I'm not the yes man. I'm not the guy that's in the middle where they're always coming to me. Control, collaborate. Ask your team, meet with them, go one-on-one, give them the power to job craft, give them the power to buy in. It may not be exactly the way you would want to do it, but allow them to have ownership and watch what they can do and give them control and just, collaborate with them and ask them. Rewards, there's external. Make sure that you're paying a fair wage. And one of the things I'm amazed at is how many dentists haven't paid themselves, because they say at the end of the day, there's no money left over. How can anybody work in an organization as hard as we do without paying themselves and not being resentful? And so find a base of what you need and pay yourself first, and make sure your employees know that their compensation is fair. But more importantly, or just as importantly, the internal rewards. Make sure that there's social recognition, that you're acknowledging and highlighting the successes of your team. Make sure that there's vertical and lateral. Make sure that you're pouring into your employees and you're acknowledging and appreciating what they do. I have 10 employees. I have my director. I pour into my director so that horizontally she can pour into the rest of the team. We have these we celebrate their work anniversary, we celebrate their birthdays, we do we have this little wooden tooth that they give to each other when somebody does something. These small recognition are just small nuances that show that you appreciate. The sense of appreciation leads to community. Get rid of the toxic employees in your office. I have a tendency to keep them way too long. The bullies, get rid of the bullies. Do activities together. Be aware if you're the bully. Be aware if you're creating the incivility by slamming down the instruments, by saying things that are insensitive, but address the toxic workplace. Find activities outside of your practice that build community. Maybe it's a service project, or maybe it's going bowling, because the community, when things get tough, they need to know that they're going to be there for each other, that they're not going to throw each other underneath the bus, that when patients or insurances or phone call don't go the way that we want, that we have each other's back. Fairness, treat everyone equally with respect. Docs, be consistent. Know that reciprocity occurs. If we treat our employees with fairness and we are consistent, they will treat each other with fairness and consistency. A mismatch of fairness will trickle down to the patients, and they will be able to feel this lack of respect. And values, the final one is actions need to be consistent with our words. They need to be congruent. What we say behind closed door with our employees matter. Watch the conversations that we have with our employees about our patients. Saying one thing, doing something else is a huge way to create a mismatch. So what I want to do is as we close, we want to be upstream and get the right. Out of the 6 causes that are supported in research, find one that may be a low-hanging fruit for you. Which one could you collaborate with your followers and on Monday meet with them and say, you know what, research shows there are 6 things that cause burnout. What is the pebble in your shoe? What is that, like that crown that's a little high, that's a little bit high, that, it just doesn't fit right? It's the ergonomics in our practice. Start with one. Ask maybe a key leader, or ask your employees, what is it that seems to be a constant irritant? And then once you identify one of the 6 root causes, customize a plan. Individualize a plan of what it might be so that you guys as a team can work through it. We're constantly looking through, and I bring these 6 root causes to my practice constantly. Almost every day, my employees know the 6 root causes, and we address one of these causes that cause friction chronically. And sometimes it's just a nuance. Sometimes it's just a slight modification. And finally, commit and take action to address one of the root causes that seem to be an irritant to cause chronic stress. I recommend that you find a community of other dentists who understand, get what you're going through, for support. The things that I hear over and over is, I wish I had somebody to talk to. I wish that there was somebody who would understand, and the stigma holding it in, that it's okay, that it's not a moral issue, it's not a character flaw, that moral injury and compassion fatigue in the healthcare first line workers, it's a reality. And burnout comes from a mismatch between the worker and the workplace. And the worker, yes, mindfulness. We need to take care of ourselves. If you come into the practice and we are unhealthy, we can't offer healthcare if we're unhealthy. And so there's tons of literature. Most of the literature on burnout deals with healthcare and coping with it. But my recommendation, based on the research, is that we need to address the workplace for the fit. That there is a balance between the relationship between the worker and the workplace, and deal with one of the 6 well-documented areas that deal with the mismatches, that crown that is slightly high, the interferences, and discuss for a better fit. And my recommendation is find a community for support and direction. Hey, docs, we weren't born learning how to place an implant. We weren't born on how to do payroll or running the business. We were born on how to talk to patients. But after 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell says, if you do something correctly, you become a master of that skill. And leadership is not something that we're born with. It's not like you're born a leader or not a leader. It's a skill set, just like our clinical skills. And leadership is imperative. Self-leadership is imperative to avoiding burnout and dealing with chronic stress. And my recommendation is, so if we get a better fit, we'll find meaning in dentistry again. We'll be able to connect again and know that no workplace is perfect. These adjustments are really important. And my goal is that we find meaning in dentistry again. I started an organization called Leaders in Dentistry. It's a cohort that we're able to meet together, support each other. If you have a group, if maybe it's your dental society, but find a group of leaders where you're able to share this chronic stress and be able to avoid burnout way down the line before deleterious effects take place. I really appreciate your time this morning. Here are some references from my research that lots of reading for you if you're interested. I'll take some questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. That was great. A lot of great information. We do have a couple questions, but you know what I wanted to start with is, so many of us have tried to develop a very positive attitude and, try to push through a lot of our stressful situations. And I'm thinking that there's some people that may be burning out, but they're kind of in denial. Are there like 3 signs that I'm heading toward burnout? What can I look for in myself to see if I'm doing okay? Dr. Johnson, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. You're glitching there.
Did you hear my question?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Sure. So many of us have developed, a positive attitude. We try to, have this very positive outlook and try to fight through a lot of difficult situations. I'm wondering if there's situations where people are kind of in denial. They're burning out, but they're in denial. How do I know? What are there signs I should look for when I'm starting to burn out?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. The stigma is, Dr. Park, if I share that I'm struggling, people are afraid that people aren't going to follow me. They look at it as a weakness, and the patients and the employees aren't going to follow me, and that we take it as a moral failure, that there's something wrong with us. The research is showing that if you're still engaged, if you still like your patients, you still like your employees, you're not burned out. You're actually overextended. Okay. And that's one of the gauges that I think that you can use to say, you know what, I need to, one of the root causes could be workload, and manage the workload so that you're able to deal with that chronic stress of fatigue. But if you have issues with cynicism and issues with self-doubt, that's where we know that you've gone from overextension to burnout. And we talked about what the high cost of burnout would be. And left untreated, 1 in 10 substance abuse users are common. I went to Sacramento on Friday to meet with California Dental Board, their diversion program, and the incidence of substance abuse due to chronic stress and burnout is increasing.
Wow. Well, listen, Dr. Johnson, we really appreciate the information. I can see you've really delved into this topic to try to help your fellow colleagues, and we all appreciate that. A lot of great information. And thanks to our panel for their help today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Be sure to join us next week when we're going to have Dr. Christopher Resnick, and he's going to be presenting implant planning, understanding restorative space. So be sure to join us. And thanks a lot, Dr. Johnson. Thanks, panel.